Some people are afraid of thunderstorms because of the lightning. Others, because of what arrives with it. When I was 8 years old, my friends and I saw something standing in the middle of a storm. A woman. Old. Bent. Motionless. At first, she was far away, just a black shape standing at the edge of an empty field. But every time thunder echoed across the sky, she got closer. She never walked. She never ran. She only moved when the thunder struck. We thought it was some kind of nightmare, a trick of the rain, a ghost story children tell each other to feel brave. But years later, I saw her again. And this time, she followed me home. Before this story begins, there's something you need to understand. If you ever see a figure standing in the rain during a thunderstorm, and she's holding something long in her hand, do not look away. Because when the next thunder hits, she won't be where you saw her last.
Back then, I was barely tall enough to reach the handle of the top kitchen cabinet, yet I was already a head taller than the other kids. I must have been 7 or 8 years old. My classmates, Leon and Caleb, and I used to wander around the outskirts of our little town all the time. We climbed over abandoned garages, scrambled up trees growing beside the highway, and invented stupid games to entertain ourselves. I still don't know where our parents thought we were. Maybe they simply didn't care. Nowadays, it's hard to imagine 3 boys roaming wherever they wanted and only returning home after dark. I remember Caleb suggesting that we explore somewhere new and go farther than we normally did. The chubby-faced idiot was sitting on a fallen tree trunk, poking at the dirt with a stick. "Man, I'm bored," Leon dragged out the words. "Let's go to the water pump and get a drink," I suggested. Caleb tossed the stick aside and jumped to his feet. "I know. Let's go there." He pointed somewhere out across the open fields. "There? What are we supposed to do there?" Leon asked with annoyance. "I think my mom said there's a spring out there. We can check it out and drink from it." The idea sounded questionable, but we went searching for water anyway.
The sun was hiding behind heavy storm clouds, and the air felt thick with heat. The field turned out to be much larger than it had seemed from a distance. We walked along a narrow dirt path for nearly half an hour and were completely drenched in sweat. All I could think about was how badly I wanted water. "Quiet," Caleb suddenly said. "Do you hear that?" I focused on the sounds around us. Somewhere nearby, water was splashing softly. "There's the spring," Leon shouted, and we all ran off the trail into the bushes. The icy water flooded my throat. We greedily scooped it into our palms and drank like animals. I splashed my face and neck, and suddenly the heat didn't feel so unbearable anymore. Then a crash sounded behind us, and another. The sky tore open with thunder. "It's gonna pour any second," I said. "Let's get back to town." "No way we'll make it," Leon replied. A heavy raindrop landed on my t-shirt. Then another hit my head. Another slapped against my arm. The rain came down in a solid wall. We rushed back onto the path. The sky had turned black. It felt like night time already, even though dinner time hadn't come yet.
"Looks like this rain's staying a while," Leon said, soaked through. "But we're already wet, so what's the rush?" Caleb raised his hands and started dancing around like a maniac. I laughed, but another crack of thunder made my heart drop straight into my stomach. Maybe we really should head home. Russ is scared," Leon sang in a mocking little tune he'd made up about me. "I'm not scared," I protested. "I'm just cold." My classmates noticed a tree standing alone in the middle of the field. It looked like a massive oak, maybe an elm, hard to tell from far away. "They say lightning hits the tallest thing around," Caleb muttered. "Hey Ryan, hear that? Better crouch down," Leon laughed. Lightning carved across the dark sky. We watched with morbid fascination, wondering if the lonely tree would finally get struck. Wind bent the tall grass nearly flat against the ground. Clumps of mud stuck to my sandals and ankles. Water streamed from our clothes and hair. We counted the seconds between the flashes and the thunder. "Whoa," I said. "Did you hear that? That one sounded really close. I didn't even make it to 7. "You count too slow," Caleb replied. "I got to 9. "I made it to 12, Leon bragged. "You can't rush it either," I argued. "Mrs. Patterson said you're supposed to count properly in your head." "Yeah, well, you probably counted 11111 if you only got 6. Caleb wrung rainwater from his shirt. "We should go home already," I reminded them. Thunder cracked again. I looked back toward the tree. Another miss.
I don't know what we were expecting. That tree had stood there for decades. It had survived hundreds of storms. Why would it suddenly explode into splinters just for our entertainment? And then I noticed something standing at the far edge of the field. Just a dark, motionless shape. A person, maybe. At first, I didn't think much of it. I had simply noticed it. But then lightning flashed again, and for a split second it looked as though the figure had moved closer. Now it stood farther into the field. I could make out arms and legs, definitely human. But there was no way someone could cross that much distance in a second. I stared at the figure, waiting to see if it moved again. The others kept talking, not paying attention to me. Thunder roared, and the dark shape jumped forward again, another 30 feet closer. That was when I understood. It only moved when the thunder sounded. Now I could make out the shape more clearly. A woman in a long skirt, holding something in her hand. A stick, or maybe a pole. "Guys," I shouted, "look over there. Do you see that old woman?" Leon and Caleb hurried over beside me. "So what?" one of them asked. "Watch, when the lightning—" A flash split the sky before I could finish speaking. I tried to follow the movement with my eyes. Impossible. The woman moved as fast as the lightning itself. Now she was another 30 feet closer. I could see the pale blotch of her face and the folds of her long, dark skirt. It was definitely a woman holding a long pole. "How did she run that fast?" Caleb squeaked. We stared without blinking, waiting for the next thunderclap. Again, the figure moved to the center of the field. It was an old woman, hunched over and motionless, leaning against the pole. Thunder. Now she was even closer. Rainwater poured from her soaked clothes. Her mouth hung open in a twisted shape. Her eyes had no visible pupils. "It's a ghost!" Leon screamed, grabbing my shoulder so hard it hurt. I didn't know what to do. My knees shook with fear. "Mom," Caleb whimpered. Thunder exploded again. Now the old woman was close enough for us to see her properly, and her face was horrifying. Her mouth was black, like a rotten hole. Her wrinkled skin looked bluish and swollen. Pale eyes stared from sockets without pimples. A few strands of gray hair clung to her bald scalp. In her hand, she held the burnt wooden handle of some tool. And with every thunderclap, she came closer. Again. "Run!" I screamed. And we ran. We sprinted all the way back toward town, stumbling and shoving past each other. By then the rain had weakened and the thunder grew distant. I kept looking over my shoulder, terrified the old woman was still following us. My heart hammered painfully. I just wanted to get home to my parents. Everything always felt safer near them. Huge puddles covered the streets of town. My wet shirt clung to my body like ice. Lights glowed warmly in apartment windows. Leon and I said goodbye to Caleb and walked down Mercer Street together. "My mom's going to kill me," I sighed, "for staying out this late and getting soaked. If I get sick, I'm dead." "Just tell her we were hanging out at Caleb's place and you only got wet on the way home," Leon suggested. "Don't mention the field or whatever that thing was." That's exactly what I did. Luckily, my mother never bothered checking whether the story was true. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the day in my mind. It felt terrifying, but somehow unreal at the same time. The rain slowly faded away. The storm passed. And eventually, I fell asleep too. But for years afterwards, thunderstorms terrified me. I'd run into my parents' room in the middle of the night and beg to sleep in their bed. I stopped going outside in the rain. Every crack of thunder made my heart freeze for a moment. By the end of that same summer, my family moved away because of my father's work. New city, new school, new friends, a completely different life. Everything started over. And somewhere in all that chaos, the memory of the old woman faded. Time passed. I became a teenager. Eventually, I had buried all my childish fears, forgot the ghost stories, and turned into a complete skeptic. I stayed that way for years. I grew in every possible sense. I ended up 6'3", the kind of guy who smacks his head on hanging light fixtures. After high school, I enrolled in a culinary academy. Yeah, my mother nearly lost her mind when I decided I wanted to become a chef. Did I know anything about cooking? Not really.
I just loved good food. I loved the artistry of fine dining. Even I didn't fully understand why I'd chosen that path, but I felt genuine excitement about it. By then, I had almost forgotten my hometown and my childhood friends. At the academy, I became close with my classmates. We were always experimenting, always creating. We were like amateur artists trying to discover ourselves through cooking. That's also where I met Olivia. She was a couple years below me. We first met near a staircase when she accidentally crashed straight into me and fell backward onto the floor. I barely even moved. I looked down at her tiny face from my ridiculous height and smiled. After that, we started spending more time together. We walked through parks, visited cafes, got excited whenever we discovered amazing food. Olivia baked incredible pastries and constantly fed me with them. I actually gained weight, which shocked me. I'd always thought a lanky guy like me could never get fat. But suddenly my sides were pushing over the waistband of my jeans. I hated that. So I started walking every evening. Sometimes alone, sometimes with Olivia. That year was unbelievably rainy. We got caught in sudden downpours constantly. Olivia splashed through puddles in her sandals, while I kept saying I should start carrying an umbrella.
One evening, we wandered to the edge of the city. Ahead of us stretched only the riverbank and endless green landscape, completely deserted in the bad weather. We should have turned back. Instead, the rain grew heavier. Thunder rolled across the sky. I tugged Olivia's hand, but she laughed and said, "Come on, let's wait under the trees for a minute. Maybe it'll calm down." We stood there watching the lead-gray clouds, and not once did I think about my childhood memory. Those events had been buried deep inside me. Then lightning flashed, thunder rolled overhead, and suddenly the nightmare returned. At the far edge of the riverbank stood a dark figure, the same black silhouette I'd seen as a child. It stood perfectly still beside the rushing water. I locked onto it instantly and stopped listening to Olivia. "Whoa, that was loud," she said nervously. "You think lightning could hit us?" Thunder. The figure moved. Not a normal person. The same hunched silhouette, long skirt, pole in hand. Impossible. Olivia fell silent. I squeezed her hand tightly. My heart pounded against my ribs. Another flash split the sky. Thunder shook the air. The figure moved farther up the riverbank. Now I could see its bluish face, its twisted open mouth, wet gray strands of hair hanging from its head. Dear God, it was the same old woman.
"Ryan, did you see that?" Olivia whispered. "I swear she moved. She was over there, and now she's..." She pointed at the thing. "Well, did you see it? Why aren't you saying anything?" Thunder crashed again. The old woman with the burnt stick appeared farther uphill. That dead face, frozen in pain and terror. Black, toothless mouth. Pale eyes without pupils. "Am I hallucinating?" Olivia asked in horror. I finally snapped out of it. "No," I said. "You're not hallucinating. Run, now."
We ran. I dragged her by the hand while her sandals nearly flew off her feet. She was terrified just from seeing how terrified I was, probably wondering what kind of horror could scare a man my size. Finally, we reached a busy street and collapsed onto a rain-soaked bench to catch our breath. The rain had stopped, but thunder still rumbled overhead. Olivia rested a hand on my shoulder. "Ryan?" I looked at her. "You were really scared," she said quietly. "We saw some old woman." I swallowed hard. "The thing is, I've seen her before." "When?" "When I was a kid." "And what was it?" Olivia asked cautiously. The memory flooded back so vividly that, for the first time in my life, I finally told someone the story.
We were walking through a field. My friends and I saw her during a thunderstorm. Every time thunder struck, she moved closer. And then what happened? Nothing? You just saw her? Olivia suddenly smiled, as if it wasn't such a big deal. I nodded. I thought maybe it was some fake childhood memory. Kids imagine things, but now I know it was real. "Creepy," Olivia murmured. "But after seeing her, did anything bad happen in your life? Maybe she's some kind of omen?" I shrugged. "Not really." "Then why be so scared?" Olivia smiled again. "Yeah, maybe there's nothing to fear." I laughed weakly, though it didn't feel funny at all. Olivia had a light soul. She recovered quickly from frightening things. I didn't. The next day, it rained again. Lightning flashed outside while I sat at home with the curtains closed, thinking of nothing except that old woman. Who was she? A witch in old-fashioned clothes carrying a burnt pole? As a child, I thought she was a ghost. Maybe she really was. Maybe she died in a storm decades ago, walking through a field with a scythe over her shoulder when lightning struck the blade and killed her instantly. That's the kind of explanation people who believe in the supernatural would give. A wandering spirit trapped on Earth, appearing only during storms. Maybe she was just a suffering soul. Maybe she wasn't dangerous at all.
The next morning, it was still raining. I'd calmed down enough to finally notice Olivia hadn't replied to any of my messages. I tried calling. No answer. A terrible feeling settled in my chest. I decided to shower, brush my teeth, and go check on her myself. She lived nearby. The moment I stepped into the bathroom, my phone rang. Finally. But it wasn't Olivia. It was her friend, Megan. "Hello?" "Ryan, where's Olivia?" Megan asked anxiously. "I can't reach her." My throat tightened. "I can't either." "What?" I threw on my clothes and ran out into the storm. Megan met me outside Olivia's apartment building. Together, we climbed to the second floor. Megan pounded on the door. "Olivia, are you home? Open up." "Wait," I said, dialing Olivia's number again. A muffled ringtone sounded from inside the apartment. "Her phone's in there," I whispered, suddenly realizing what that could mean. "This isn't like her," Megan said. "Call the police." The police arrived. At first, they refused to break the lock, insisting there wasn't enough reason. Eventually, they agreed and called a locksmith. He opened the apartment in under 2 minutes. Megan and I were told to stay in the hallway. I couldn't. I followed the officers inside. Curtains billowed in the single-room apartment. Rain lashed through an open window. At first, I didn't notice the body. Olivia lay beside the coffee table. "Olivia!" I tried to rush toward her, but someone grabbed my arm. "What happened to her?" "She's dead," the sergeant said. I could already see that. The right side of her face had been burned almost to the bone. Her jaw hung unnaturally sideways. Her eyes were fixed and doll-like. I wasn't an expert, but I immediately recognized what it looked like. Electrocution. She was dead. The woman I loved was dead, and I'd never even managed to tell her I loved her.
Death had destroyed her beautiful face so completely that I hated myself for remembering her that way. The preliminary conclusion was death by lightning strike. I knew that wasn't true. The old woman killed her, without question. I screamed it at everyone, but nobody listened. They thought grief had driven me insane. Maybe it had. Because in my right mind, I never would have told anyone about the terrible old woman who appeared during storms. Dark days followed. Days filled with grief. I wandered the streets without purpose, unable to imagine a future anymore. Then one evening, rain whispered against the windows. Lightning flashed. My dark apartment lit up blue for an instant. I stood from the couch, walked to the window, and pulled the curtains aside. Rain flooded the courtyard below. Empty.
Thunder rolled again, and at the far end of the courtyard a familiar figure appeared, a dark silhouette holding a pole. Now she had come for me. My heart trembled, but my mind felt strangely detached from fear. I opened the window. Fresh rain-filled air rushed into the stale apartment. Another crooked bolt of lightning flashed across the horizon. The old woman now stood beside the dumpsters, still far away. Maybe Olivia had stood at her own window on that final night and watched the same figure approach. Was she afraid, or only curious? Now the old woman stood beside the parking lot, the light of the storm reflected in her dead eyes. "Come on," I whispered through cold lips. "Take me too." Thunder exploded again. The horrible old woman stood directly beneath my window and looked up at me. I couldn't bear that face. I turned away. One more flash and she would be inside. I squeezed my eyes shut and waited for death. But nothing happened. The rain kept falling. And then I realized the lightning had stopped. The storm was over.
Suddenly, I felt relief. Facing death had sobered me. Maybe I wasn't completely finished with life after all. Maybe I needed to pull myself together, get out of bed, stop staring at the ceiling every day. Olivia wouldn't have wanted me to disappear into endless misery. I didn't see the old woman again that year. The following summer was brutally hot, no thunderstorms at all. But this June, storms returned. The grief never left me. Not a single day passes without me thinking about Olivia. I never met another woman like her. I don't know why I suddenly decided to return to my hometown. It happened impulsively. I bought a train ticket and went back for the weekend. Everything had changed. Chain stores everywhere, new cafes, better roads. I wandered through the streets trying to remember where everyone used to live. Then a bearded guy approached me.
"Ryan? Holy crap, is that you? Damn, you got tall." I stared at him for several seconds before recognizing him. It was Dylan, my old neighbor from childhood. We shook hands. "Dylan, wow, it's been forever." "You back for good?" he asked. "No," I answered sadly. "Visiting family?" I shook my head. "I wanted to see some old classmates, find out how they're doing." "Oh, reunion or something?" "No, I just wanted to see if any of them still lived here." "Gotcha," Dylan said. "Well, good seeing you." Before he could leave, I stopped him. "Hey, do you remember Leon Parker and Caleb Mercer?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I remember them. Do you know where they are now?" Dylan's expression changed immediately. "You didn't hear?" A cold feeling spread through me. "They're in the cemetery."
For some reason, the answer didn't shock me as much as it should have. I think part of me already knew. "Lightning struck them," Dylan said quietly, "back when we were kids." I stayed silent. They kept wandering around those fields outside town. One day they never came back. They found both bodies burned black. He sighed heavily. The whole town talked about it. It was even in the newspaper. I had lived for years without knowing. The old woman took them the same year my family moved away. Looks like she missed one of us and spent a very long time searching for me.
The warm days are back now, but more storms are coming. And honestly, I don't know if I'm meant to survive this summer.